Welcome to another episode of Business Over Borders with your host, Leo Tucker. This is our mini-series on consumer behavior, and I'm joined again by Matt Steinbrecher. Matt, welcome again to the show. How you doing?
Good, man. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm excited to be talking about consumer behaviors, and I think Canada is our country du jour. How do you feel about that?
Love it. Let's kick it.
So last time we talked, we had a conversation about the U.S. and their buying habits. There are some similarities. There are some differences. Let's pick apart some of those differences of spending habits, consumer behaviors in Canada. Let's start with payment methods. Big on credit cards?
Yeah, definitely. I would say a lot of people are still pretty credit heavy. PayPal is obviously another preferred method that a lot of people in Canada have too. Interact, I would say, is big, but probably not used on everyday purchases when it comes to like buying stuff online, particularly for like online retail. But for sure, credit card is king.
Okay, so let's talk then about pricing. I remember growing up and going into a bookstore, and I would see two prices on the labels. It would say, US $10, Canada $12. So there was always that sort of dual pricing there across the board. Are there any, what do consumers like to see when they go to the stores online? Is there more of a trust of buying things with the US dollars, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think most Canadians, the vast majority of the country is going to want to purchase in Canadian dollars. However,
Sure.
They don't want to buy something in Canadian dollars that's marked up. So they don't want to pay in their local currency and have the convenience of that, which is, the amount that they'd be more familiar with in the US dollar rate, but they don't want to pay a premium to do so. So they would rather just pay the US dollar rate if they're not actually getting any value for paying in the Canadian dollar amount. So one of the things that a lot of US retailers have struggled with over the years is being able to localize to Canadians while giving a very competitive exchange rate and also giving the convenience of making it a seamless transaction for the Canadian shopper on their checkout. So overall, Canada and US, it's actually quite interesting because Canadians are so savvy about what the current exchange rate is between Canadian dollars and US dollars, whereas most Americans have zero idea what the value of the Canadian dollar is on any given day. But, I think it's like 90% of Canada lives within like 100 miles of the US border. So naturally, there's so much trade that happens, and I think that most Canadian shoppers are just used to seeing both prices because there's obviously a ton of imports into Canada that come from the US. So yeah, I think having the preference is always purchasing in Canadian dollars, but knowing what that exchange rate is and not having to pay a huge markup for it is crucial.
That's a good point. Let's talk a little bit more about international purchases. And I'm talking here about DDU, DDP. When you order something from FedEx and they call you or message you and say, hey, you owe duties on this. This just got more expensive. Let's talk about that strategy for Canadians.
Yeah, Canada is actually one of the most unique countries in the world with shopper experience. So it's a cool one to talk about for sure. Obviously, leaving out the foreign exchange aspect to it, the other interesting part is the duties and taxes. So most Canadian customers, I guess backing up quite a few years, it was really common in Canada that you could buy goods and import them into the country. And unless it was a very high value, you would be able to get it without having to pay any duty and taxes on that product. So it would clear customs, it would come through, gets delivered to your door. Maybe about, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, it started getting to a point where a lot of customs brokers were starting to stop more and more packages. Then the experience is basically you don't pay your duties and taxes. Your delivery guy comes to your door, leaves a note on your door and says, hey, you owe me like $40 for duties and taxes on this particular product. The customer doesn't love that experience because not only do they have to pay that $40 to the government to pay for the duties and taxes, they also then have to pay a surcharge to pay that delivery guy for his time to go and collect the extra money and go through that whole process of like coming back and re-delivering it after the money was collected. So it kind of creates this huge disruption in the supply chain. from buying a product from, like, let's just keep it simple with a US based business, getting it delivered to, your doorstep in Calgary. From a proximity perspective, it's not that far typically to get the item delivered, or wouldn't be any further than going from New York to LA, for example. But as soon as you cross that border, duties and taxes get introduced. And I think
Yeah.
there are a lot of different types of products that are also under the NAFTA agreement, which was passed, in the early 90s to basically create free
Hmm.
trade and stimulate trade between the US and Canada and Mexico as well, um, which basically absolved the need to have any duties applied to most everyday goods that Canadians were purchasing from America. And so you kind of put these two things together and you start to have this change in experience where Canadians are used to not having to pay for all these duties and taxes, and that they're able to just kind of pay the surface level face value for it, or whatever the retail price is for that t-shirt or dress or whatever you're buying, and not have to pay the additional duties and tax. As we fast forwarded, of course, the Canadian government is wising up because they want to make more money on imports. Why wouldn't they? Every government wants to. And so, even with the free trade agreement between the US and Canada, there are still a lot of products that do have duties applied. But regardless of a free trade agreement, the Canadian government wants to collect taxes. It's GST or HST.
Yep. PST. We got them all. All the STs. We got them.
So, in recent years, the Canadian government started to wise up and stop a lot of these packages and charging all these customers at the final mile through their carrier. And that introduced a ton of friction in the purchasing process. And I really think that for the most part, Canadians now have wised up to understanding the types of products that they can buy and not have to pay duties and tax on. On the flip side, you also have globalization rising and making it easier and easier to ship packages all over the world. So you have these international retailers that are trying to reduce that friction in the shopping experience and give the Canadian shopper a DDP experience, which is duties delivered paid. And that basically means you pay it all up front. And that way your doorman's never going to give you any trouble. They just drop off the package and you get it in however many days it takes to get to you.
No surprise charges or delays.
Yeah. Yeah. And the really interesting thing about the Canadian shopper experience and expectation is that a lot of people like to roll the dice.
Oh yeah. Tell me a story.
I mean, there's products that you need and there's products that you want. And if it's a product that you need, you're going to get it there on time and pay for it and know that you're going to have to eat the customs fees and tax fees. Like, you're just going to pay it. If you're shopping online and you want it and it needs to be there by Tuesday and it's Wednesday, the week before, you're just going to pay it. You don't want any delays at customs or anything like that. If you don't have that option, though, as a Canadian, and you need it in a certain amount of time, you're going to find a different retailer. You're going to churn from that website. You're not going to convert. So you want to make sure that you have
Right.
that flexibility where if you need this product in a particular amount of time, that you can pay for your duties and taxes up front. But there are also a flip side of that where if you want this product, you don't really need it or any particular time constraint of needing it, you don't want to pay those duties and taxes up front, and you would rather roll the dice and see if your delivery guy comes and slaps a little post-it on your door that says you owe X amount of money. And I think that's the key difference, is that we're always in the online retail space, especially, we're always focused on how do we make the shopping experience smoother for the customer. And in Canada, ship it DDP. But not all Canadians are going to want to ship it DDP. They may not want to pay the duties and taxes, or they may think that the fees you're charging to ship it DDP and the duties and taxes are inflated. They would rather just roll the dice and ship it duties unpaid, in some instances. And so I think Canada is one of the rare experiences around the world, or rare countries around the world with consumer experience, is making sure that they always have that option to ship it delivered, with duties paid or duties unpaid. And that gives them the flexibility of whether or not they want to pay it up front or roll the dice.
I know I've seen on various checkouts the message that there may be additional duties and taxes upon delivery. And I feel like I've seen the option too to pick one where it was included and one where it was not.
If you're not shipping duties paid into Canada, probably like 50% of your customers are being impacted by their doorman. I say doorman, but like your delivery guy, right? FedEx,
Your
UPS,
door person.
Canada Post. Yeah, the person that's coming to your door and actually dropping that package at your apartment complex or your front door or whatever. And it costs them time and money, all these carriers that are dropping this product at your door. That delivery person has a salary. There's a cost of them getting into a truck or hopping off whatever and dropping off these products on your doorstep for your convenience. There's a cost for them to come and deliver a slip to you and then go back, wait until you pay it. They get a notification and then they can deliver it on their next route a few days later or a day later or whatever it might be. Like, that's added cost. It's added time and money for the delivery people. So they ultimately are charging you a markup. So where we see it is, if you aren't offering DDP into Canada and you're just forcing them to pay it, probably 50% of your packages are getting stopped on average. It does depend on what you're selling and how expensive it is and a few other factors. But on average, probably like 50% of your packages are getting stopped. And the experience for the shopper is terrible if they didn't intentionally choose that shipping method.
Yeah.
But giving them the option to pay up front, again, that's kind of why I always consider it as like, do you need this product on time or do you just want this product to come here smoothly? And it really does make a difference in terms of, what it is and who it's going to and the types of demographics. But yeah, that's something really important to know, that Canadians in particular, they want it. They want optionality. They want to know if they can ship it DDP, if they can ship it DDU. And I think that's always the best way to maximize conversion rate there.
So Canada and the US both follow fairly similar holiday schedules. So I imagine the hot spikes of purchasing times throughout the year probably coincide pretty closely. Are there any peaks that merchants selling into Canada should know about?
Yeah, Boxing Day. I would say in general, it's very cyclically similar to the U.S. I don't feel that there's a ton of additional holidays that Canada has. There are a lot of additional holidays and different holidays, but there's none that I think are driven as much around buying behaviors. Perhaps celebrating different things, but not as heavily influenced, I think, as some of the made up like U.S. holidays. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, given you've lived in both countries.
Yeah. Boxing Day is the only one that comes to mind as being something different. I remember growing up in the States and looking at the calendar and seeing Boxing Day, and I just had the wildest imagination on what possibly could happen on Boxing Day. Is everybody fighting each other? I was like, no, the Canadians are pretty nice. That's probably not it. Or, well, getting in boxes and wandering around town. I didn't know. Then I got here, and turns out that's when all the sales happen. So that's really the big thing I noticed.
Yeah. And I feel like there's still, Boxing Day sales in the U.S. too. They just don't call it that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that, the consumer behavior is really different of how people purchase online and what they expect. It's so similar in different ways to the U.S. where, all the trends and the patterns and how people buy are pretty dang similar. But then you actually have these weird nuances like shipping DDP and DDU where that doesn't exist in the U.S. for the most part. And so, you kind of have these regulatory hurdles that consumers have to navigate through, and that ultimately drives like their purchasing decisions and what they expect to see on your website. So although they follow similar trends, it is a very slippery slope for U.S. merchants to just assume that they can sell to Canadians DDU and in U.S. dollars and they're going to do well there. It's just never going to happen. You're not going to be able to properly capture those customers and retain them for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to give us a quick summary of what merchants can do to succeed selling to Canadian customers?
Yeah, when you're selling into Canada, particularly from the U.S., you always want to make sure you're offering Canadian dollars first and foremost and doing it at a very competitive exchange rate, because they are absolutely aware of if you are marking it up they will not want to pay that exchange rate price, and they will find your product somewhere else. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, is making sure that you have DDU, delivered duties unpaid, and DDP, delivered duty paid options at the time of checkout. And that's because a lot of Canadian shoppers will still prefer to roll the dice sometimes to buy something and not pay the duties and taxes on it, and maybe see if they get charged by their carrier when it comes to delivery day, versus having to pay it up front. And sometimes they'll want to pay it up front so that way there's no risk of any delays or stopping at customs, anything like that. So that's kind of the two main things I would say overall in terms of what to know when selling into Canada and how to really maximize the shopping experience.
Great. That's awesome information. Matt, thanks for joining us again, and hope to see you next time when we talk about the rest of the world. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us again on Consumer Behavior mini-series here on Business Over Borders. If you like this, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Subscribe if you feel like it. And if you want to hear about what we got coming up next, hit that little bell. See you next time.
Brought to you by the Reach Network. Visit withreach.com/network for more.